Okay, welcome back, everyone. We will be starting the panel shortly. This is the second portion of the panel, which focuses on visions for accountability and justice through international human rights law and the idea of restorative justice and what that may look like in the future in Iran. Our first speaker for the Visions panel is Iraj Abedian. He is founder and chairman of the Pan-African Capital Holdings Limited and Pan-African Investment and Research Services Limited. He was professor of economics at the University of Cape Town before entering the business sector. Iraj is a member of the Baha'i community, a community that is systemically persecuted and prosecuted by the Islamic Republic. His talk is titled Lessons from the South African Contemporary Movement, 1994 to 2024. Iraj, the microphone is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much, dear friends. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share some of my experiences in South Africa over the past 42 years. And it is indeed an honor to be in the presence of the friends this evening or today. I'm in Johannesburg at the moment, and it's in the middle of the night, so I refer to evening. I came to South Africa in 1980, in the middle of the dark days of apartheid. South Africa, as you would know, was the last bastion of racial discrimination, which had over 100 years of history under colonial regimes, imperialist, and finally apartheid regime. In 1980s, when I arrived in South Africa, apartheid and racial tension had reached its highest. And it was quite clear that that in those dark days, apartheid was no longer sustainable from a social point of view, from a political point of view. Its oppression of the society had reached its highest, and at the same time, opposition, both military as well as peaceful, via different organizations, had ramped up. By 1985, 86, 87, a group of intellectuals, mostly academicians, and some business leaders and political and human rights activists decided that they would begin what was legally not allowable, or was illegal, more specifically, but they started indirect, underground, and some secret engagements with various leaders of African National Congress. And the top leader of, and the most well-known leader of African National Congress at that time, which was the main opposition, not only, but the main opposition group against apartheid, was Mandela, who was in prison. By late 1980s, there was a massive tension within the apartheid nationalist party, the racist, white racist political dominant, and they tried to split this community into white and Indian and colored and African. In other words, they wanted to essentially split the opposition so that they can prolong and to some extent legitimize their racist regime. That did not work. That did not last more than 5 years, and it in fact backfired in many respects. I would like to spend, given that I have a limited time, most of my time and experience in post-apartheid, which I believe has a lot of insights, a lot of lessons, a lot of guidelines for a possible Iranian situation beyond the rule of the mullahs. Beyond the Islamic Republic, there are a lot of similarities with South Africa's beyond apartheid. In that regard, in 1994, when a kind of agreement was reached. Initially, it was not open. It was more tacit or implicit, but it became more and more clear that by 1991, apartheid could no longer govern the country, specifically from an economic point of view. And for me, this is the first similarity between the height of apartheid, when it reached the edge of collapse, and the situation in Iran. That one can analyze. We don't have the time on it at the moment. It's not the occasion for it. But the first similarity is when economic underpinning of the society becomes unsustainable, becomes fractured and fragile, and to all those who are opposing the system or the regime, and those who are in favor of regime, and those who are in the belly of the beast of the regime, there is no doubt left that the superstructure of the political and apartheid type of constitutional governance is no longer sustainable. That became quite clear in South Africa around 1988-89. At that time, within the cabinet of the apartheid regime, there was a split. The Minister of Justice and a couple others started negotiating with Mandela in prison. They had visits, they had discussions, they had agreements and disagreements. That culminated in a shift in both positions, both in white supremacist government as well as within the African National Congress. I must emphasize that at that time, there were other anti-apartheid groups, political parties, all of them underground, who had very, very divergent views from African National Congress. Inside the country, likewise, there were groups, particularly labor unions, human rights activists, social groupings, social activists, under a wide range of groupings, ideologically, as well as geographically, as well as in terms of gender and even age. It is important to note another similarity, that much of the internal opposition to apartheid regime came from women. Women were the cornerstone of domestic opposition to apartheid, followed by labor unions. These two groupings within the country became the two pillars of anti-apartheid on a daily basis. And of course, outside the country, there were African National Congress leaders who were active in a very, very systematic and very scientific way, engaging both on the continent of Africa, but very importantly, on the continent of Europe. Fighting apartheid at the United Nations, fighting apartheid within the art community, fighting apartheid within the sporting communities, embargoes against sports such as cricket and rugby that were almost like a religion for the white supremacist population, were highly effective in showing the unsustainability, unacceptability, and inhumanity of apartheid regime. So all of these, my apology, all of this culminated in the late 80s, early 90s, specifically 1990, where the president of South Africa at that time decided to release Mandela, and Mandela coming out created a very interesting dilemma for the anti-apartheid regime, for anti-apartheid groupings and political parties. They didn't know how to govern. They were not cohesive. They had no preparation in terms of governance in any aspects or any dimensions of governance. By that, I mean they did not have an economic policy. They have some ideas, some ideologies, but they didn't know how to translate those. And quite frankly, they did not have the competency and the coordinated approach to issues of social governance. In my view, and I am by no means an expert, but if I watch and analyze and listen and witness the chaos amongst the opposition parties, groupings um, of the Iranians outside Iran to the regime inside, there is a similar type of lack of cohesion, lack of competency, a lot of statements, but very little competency and ability to coordinate. Of course, that coalesced very quickly in South Africa. From 1991 to 1993, there was a consistent, orchestrated, almost 24/7, 365 effort to bring all these divergent and opposing views, all of whom who had one thing in common, and that was opposition to apartheid, and they wanted to bring down and collapse the regime. That was their only common border. On almost on everything else, they were divergent. And between 1991 and 1993, a great deal of social activity took place, facilitated by both local and international human rights activists, social justice activists, religious organizations. Churches were very, very active from both Europe, particularly the Anglican Church and of England, as well as many, many Methodist churches of the United States, with financial as well as other kinds of support. In 1994, finally, the apartheid regime collapsed. You would know that African National Congress, with all the allies that they had in the labor unions and women groups in South Africa, they became the dominant, as expected, the dominant victor, with almost 69 to 70% of the popular vote. Mandela at that time, as the leader of the African National Congress, with almost 70% of the votes in the bag, decided that it was time for reconciliation. It was time for bringing opposing views, white, black, and within the black groupings. Therefore, instead of dominating government, he opted for what was then introduced as government of national unity. In other words, it brought white, the ex-president, which was a white, Mr. de Klerk, became his deputy. Some of the ministers of the previous white regime were brought to Mandela's cabinet. Some of the opposing black groupings who were fighting with African National Congress for 30, 40 years, both inside the country and outside, they were invited to the cabinet. So the government of national unity was an important initiative, an important gesture, and as well as an important intervention led by Mandela to make sure that post-collapse of apartheid, the country begins to think not retribution, not revenge, but unity and reconciliation. So in 1995, the parliament passed an act for motion of unity and national reconciliation, followed by the establishment of a very, if I'm not mistaken, the first in recent history of humankind, that a Truth and Reconciliation Commission was established, led by Bishop Tutu, a very well-respected anti-apartheid religious leader, whose deputy was another human rights activist, a white, very well-known, very well-respected Dr. Borain, and a couple of other commissioners who spent over 3 years on a daily basis in public, and that's another important insight and lesson from South Africa's experience, inviting all those who were either victims or perpetrators of injustice, rape, murder, imprisonment, disappearance of human beings. Over 7,000 cases were recorded. And of course, the law allowed that those who came voluntarily to declare and reveal all their and accept responsibility And if it was true that they were actually the perpetrators of those events, they were exempt from persecution legally subsequent. So amnesty would be given to those who told the truth. And the truth told by those who perpetrated and truth held or told or shared by those who were the victims of it had to reconcile, and the commission had to decide whether they should grant amnesty or not. Thousands upon thousands of cases were applied for, but only about 590, I'm rounding the numbers, about 590 amnesties were given, and the rest were denied. Over 60,000 cases shared their views on TV, radio, from morning to night. And as you can imagine, it was a torturous story to listen to. But for 3 years, it focused the attention of the nation, who were full of pain, full of suffering, full of hurt, on ways and means of coming to terms with this. Fascinating stories were revealed during and post the commission. 5 volumes of these reports are still available. Movies were made, poetry, theatrical shows, all of it brought South Africa's population, those who were victimized and those who were perpetrators of these crimes, to a different space. Of course, they were opposing views at the same time. So that experience in South Africa was very unique, and it helped to bring temperatures down, to bring calm and some kind of comfort or solace to those who had been victimized, but also chastise many who had perpetrated crimes, murder. And as you can imagine, much like the situation in Iran, the most inhuman cases were recorded by those who had done it and those who were victims of it. But at the end, 5 years later, that Truth and Reconciliation Commission was very helpful to bring out a lot of pain from within the society and pave the way for a much more peaceful society. My last point is to highlight the fact that in the process of Truth and Reconciliation happening, a group of people were also tasked with drawing up South Africa's new constitution, which is regarded as a fairly progressive constitution. The chapter 2 of this constitution is entirely about a Bill of Human Rights, a set of rights that are inviolable. No government can act anything that breaks those human rights, rights of human dignity, rights of freedom of press, rights of human belief and religious beliefs, or rights of group and associations. I don't have time, my time is over, but these were my lessons that I experienced during my the first 20 years in South Africa. Thank you very much.